The hidden psychology that separates deep thinkers from the crowd. Carl Jung. It starts with a strange feeling. A sense that something isn't quite right, not in the world, but in you. You're going through your day like everyone else, but while others seem satisfied with the flow of routine, you feel like you're watching life from a distance. You're not just living, you're observing yourself living. That subtle awareness, that internal commentary, that's the beginning of what separates deep thinkers from the crowd. And it's not about intelligence. It's not about education or being better read. It's something far more elusive. Carl Jung called it individuation, a psychological and spiritual process of becoming who you truly are, beneath the masks, the roles, the expectations. And here's where it gets really interesting. Most people live out their lives unconsciously adopting roles given to them by society: the worker, the parent, the entertainer, the achiever. But deep thinkers, those who truly step beyond the crowd, don't settle for those labels. They ask, what is this role doing to my soul? They don't just ask what they're supposed to do. They ask why they're supposed to do it, who decided, and what it costs to obey without questioning. That awareness creates a gap, a psychological space between stimulus and response. And in that gap, something powerful begins to awaken: the self. Carl Jung believed that the psyche is not a monolith. It's not a single conscious mind sitting at the top of a hierarchy. No, the conscious mind is just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath it lies the vast unconscious, and within that, the collective unconscious, a realm of archetypes, patterns, and primordial images that shape our very way of being. The deep thinker is someone who dares to descend into this realm. They face the unknown within. They risk encountering what Jung called the shadow, the parts of ourselves we deny, repress, or disown. Most people run from the shadow. Deep thinkers don't. They turn toward it. Ask yourself, what part of me have I buried because I thought it was unacceptable? Maybe it's your anger. Maybe it's your wildness. Maybe it's a creative dream society told you was impractical. The crowd suppresses these things to fit in. Deep thinkers retrieve them and integrate them. That's not easy. It's terrifying. But it's necessary for deep transformation.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
This brings us to the hidden psychology that truly separates the few from the many, the willingness to confront inner contradiction. The crowd seeks certainty, comfort, and black and white answers. The deep thinker embraces paradox. They can hold multiple truths in tension. They don't need everything to be resolved. They can sit in the ambiguity of life and still find meaning. Here's a question that might mess with you a little. What if the thing you're most afraid of is the very thing that could set you free? Jung believed that the treasure you seek is in the cave you're afraid to enter. That treasure isn't just knowledge. It's a deeper version of yourself, waiting to be born. But it requires a death, a symbolic death of the ego, of the false self constructed to win approval. Most people avoid this death. That's why they never truly live. We live in a world obsessed with answers, with branding, with identity. People spend years curating a version of themselves for social media, for employers, for relationships. But how often do they ask, who am I when no one's watching? That's the question that haunts deep thinkers. And Carl Jung would say that the answer lies not in adding more traits or achievements, but in subtraction, in peeling back the layers of conditioning until what remains is raw, real, and mysterious. Now here's where this gets practical, because this isn't just abstract philosophy. The psychology of deep thinking affects how you live, how you work, how you relate. For example, in a world that rewards speed, deep thinkers slow down. They reflect. They question the premise. In a culture of opinions, they seek understanding. In a society addicted to dopamine, they cultivate depth. This isn't always rewarded. In fact, it's often punished. Deep thinkers are labeled weird, slow, or overly philosophical. But what if that very resistance is a sign you're on the right path? Let me ask you something. Have you ever had a thought so powerful, so unsettling, that you couldn't say it out loud? Not because it was inappropriate, but because it revealed something so deep, so raw, that it scared even you. That's the edge of deep thinking. That's the threshold where the crowd stops and the journey of individuation begins. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." But deep thinkers do the opposite. They plunge into the soul's chaos to find the hidden order. They don't run from suffering, they ask what the suffering is trying to teach. They don't avoid their dreams, they study them. They don't just read books, they let books read them. This is the hidden psychology at work, an inner compass that prioritizes authenticity over approval, depth over distraction, and meaning over comfort. And here's the paradox. The more you step away from the crowd to find yourself, the more connected you become to others, not through conformity, but through empathy. You understand suffering more deeply. You understand joy more fully. You see the archetypes playing out in everyone: the hero, the victim, the rebel, the sage. You stop judging people by surface behavior and start sensing the deeper story within. That's the essence of Jung's work, not just self-discovery, but union. Individuation is not isolation, it's integration. So ask yourself this: am I living my life, or am I living the life someone else scripted for me? That question alone can change everything. The mirror of the shadow. Why facing your inner darkness unlocks your hidden power. There's a moment in every deep thinker's journey where the world begins to lose its color, not from depression, but from disillusionment. The things that once seemed meaningful, praise, success, social validation, begin to look like cardboard cutouts. And the terrifying realization dawns: it's not the world that's hollow, it's the self I've been performing. That's when the shadow arrives, not as a villain, but as a mirror. Carl Jung's concept of the shadow is one of the most misunderstood ideas in psychology. But people often assume it's just the dark part of themselves, the anger, the jealousy, the lust. But the shadow is far more profound. It includes anything we've disowned, rejected, or refused to look at. But sometimes that even includes our brilliance, our confidence, our strange and beautiful uniqueness that we buried to fit in. The crowd avoids the shadow because it disrupts the illusion of who they think they are. But deep thinkers, those who walk the path of individuation, do something radical. They turn toward it. They look into the mirror of the shadow and say, "There you are." And that moment, that willingness to look inward without flinching, is where true transformation begins. Because here's what Jung knew: the shadow isn't the enemy. It's the gatekeeper. It holds the very parts of ourselves we need to become whole. Let me ask you a question that Jung would absolutely love. What if the parts of yourself you're most ashamed of are actually the keys to your power? That rage you hide, it might be the fuel you need to set boundaries. That envy you suppress, It might be pointing you toward a hidden desire you've been too afraid to pursue. That weird idea you never said out loud. It might be the beginning of your life's work. The shadow doesn't just contain our bad parts, it contains everything we've been socially conditioned to suppress. And so, confronting the shadow isn't about guilt, it's about reclaiming your energy. But this isn't easy. In fact, it's one of the hardest psychological and spiritual tasks a human being can undertake. When you meet the shadow, you meet contradiction. You see that you're not just the kind, generous person you present to others, you're also the manipulative one, the bitter one, the one who sometimes wants to destroy what you can't control. That realization can shatter your self-image. But here's the paradox, that shattering is liberation. Because once the ego breaks, you're no longer a prisoner of your own persona. You become real, whole, human. Carl Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That single sentence is like a thunderclap. It means that everything you refuse to face in yourself, everything that's kept in the dark, will control you from the shadows. You'll sabotage relationships without knowing why. You'll repeat patterns and call them destiny. You'll blame others for your suffering, not realizing the battlefield is inside you. But bring that unconsciousness into awareness. You take your power back. This is why deep thinkers often seem intense, even haunted. They've gone into the underworld of their psyche and returned with truth. And it's rarely comfortable. But it's always liberating. Because when you integrate the shadow, you stop being at war with yourself. You no longer need to project your darkness onto the world. You stop demonizing others for traits you secretly fear in yourself. You become more compassionate not because you're morally superior, but because you've seen the same darkness within yourself. Here's a practical truth that emerges from this. The more shadow you integrate, the less reactive you become. You're no longer triggered by everything. You can hold space for discomfort. You can listen to opposing views without collapsing into defensiveness. That's a superpower in today's world. Most people are trapped in ego reactions. Deep thinkers, those who've done the inner work, respond from a deeper place. They're not perfect, but they're present. So ask yourself, what parts of me have I locked away because I thought they were unacceptable? And then ask, what would happen if I got curious about them instead of ashamed? That's where the magic begins, because curiosity dissolves shame. And when shame dissolves, energy is released. Creative energy, emotional energy, spiritual energy, energy you can use to build, to love, to change. The shadow isn't your enemy, it's your exiled potential. And the moment you face it, everything begins to shift. Not instantly, not without pain, but with a depth that the crowd will never know. And that, right there, is what separates deep thinkers from the rest. They're not better. They're just brave enough to look into the darkness and say, I see you. Let's talk. Beyond the persona, escaping the mask society wants you to wear. Every one of us wears a mask. Not just in public, but in private too. Carl Jung called it the persona, the social face we present to the world. It's not inherently bad. In fact, we need the persona. It helps us navigate society, form relationships, and function in roles. But problems arise when we forget it's a mask. When we start believing we are the persona, We become trapped in a psychological costume stitched together by other people's expectations. Deep thinkers, however, eventually experience a rupture, an internal dissonance that whispers, "This isn't who I truly am." That moment is terrifying, but it's also the beginning of freedom. From childhood, we're taught to be acceptable, likable, productive, obedient, and so we learn to perform. We smile when we're sad. We agree to things we don't believe in. We pursue careers that impress others but starve our soul. Over time, the persona becomes our prison. We forget our own voice. We lose the ability to distinguish between what we want and what the world wants from us. The deep thinker, however, starts to notice the cracks. They feel the weight of inauthenticity. They notice how drained they feel after socializing. They notice how their achievements feel hollow. And they begin to ask the question that most people are too afraid to confront: who am I beneath this mask? This is where individuation, the central theme of Jung's psychology, becomes urgent. Individuation is not becoming someone new. It's becoming who you really are underneath the layers of performance. But here's the hard truth: the persona doesn't go quietly. It's invested in your survival. It's helped you avoid ridicule, rejection, and abandonment. So when you challenge it, fear arises. You start worrying, what if people don't like the real me? What if I lose everything? And that's the razor's edge where most stop. They retreat back into the comfort of their social identity. But the deep thinker leans in. They understand that authenticity isn't about being liked, it's about being real. Carl Jung warned that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But privilege doesn't mean ease. It means responsibility. And that responsibility begins when you start to dismantle your persona, not recklessly, but consciously. You begin to notice when you're performing instead of living. You catch yourself laughing at jokes you don't find funny, agreeing with opinions you don't hold, pursuing goals you don't even want. And in that awareness, you begin the process of reclaiming your soul. Here's a question that can shake you to your core. If no one ever praised you again, what would you still do? That question cuts through the persona like a scalpel. It reveals what's real, and often what's real is inconvenient. It might mean walking away from a career that looks perfect on paper. It might mean disappointing your family. It might mean standing alone. But it also means liberation. Because when you no longer need to be seen a certain way, you're finally free to see yourself clearly. This is what separates deep thinkers from the crowd. They don't just seek knowledge, they seek self-knowledge. They don't just ask, what is true? They ask, what is true for me? That's a dangerous question in a world built on conformity. But it's the only question that leads to real meaning. And once you escape the persona, something unexpected happens. You become more connected, not less. You begin attracting people who resonate with your truth, not your mask. Your relationships deepen. Your work becomes aligned with your purpose. Your energy returns. Because pretending is exhausting, and authenticity, while risky, is rejuvenating. The crowd builds their identity from the outside in titles, roles, accolades. Deep thinkers build from the inside out values, vision, and inner truth. And while the outside-in path may bring faster rewards, it often leads to a midlife crisis, a spiritual collapse, or a quiet resignation. The inside-out path is slower, messier, lonelier, but it leads to wholeness. So ask yourself, where am I still performing? What truths have I silenced to maintain an image? And what would it feel like to finally stop pretending? These are not easy questions, but they are essential if you want to live a life that is yours, not a performance, not a projection, but a real, grounded, soul-aligned existence. Because the moment you take off the mask, you don't just become more yourself, you give others permission to do the same. And maybe, just maybe, that's how we change the world. Not through grand revolutions, but through quiet acts of authenticity that ripple outward and awaken others. The awakening of the self, how individuation transforms your inner and outer world. Individuation is not a destination. It's not a badge of enlightenment or a status you achieve. It's a process, a slow, intimate unraveling of everything you are not, so that what is can emerge. Carl Jung knew this intimately. He understood that the path to wholeness isn't about becoming perfect, but it's about becoming real. And that requires courage, because to individuate, you must walk a road that few are willing to take. You must leave behind the comfort of consensus reality, the safety of groupthink, and the flattering illusion that you already know who you are. You must be willing to be misunderstood, to be alone, to be reborn. Here's the astonishing paradox. The more you become uniquely yourself, the more universal your experience becomes. You stop seeing yourself as separate from others and begin to understand that your inner world reflects the world at large, that your struggles are archetypal, that your suffering is connected to the human condition. And that's when something extraordinary happens. Compassion awakens, not the fluffy, performative kind, but the deep, grounded compassion that comes from seeing people not as enemies or strangers, but as mirrors. You recognize their masks because you've worn them. You feel their wounds because you've bled from the same places. This is the essence of the awakened self. It sees through. It sees through the surface drama to the deeper patterns. It sees through societal roles to the soul underneath. And most importantly, it sees through its own ego, its own illusions, biases, and defenses. But that doesn't mean you become passive or detached. On the contrary, it means you show up more fully. You start living from a place of integrity because you've stopped outsourcing your identity. But let me ask you a question that might echo in your mind for days. What would your life look like if you stopped trying to be impressive and started trying to be real? That question isn't just philosophical, it's revolutionary. Because when you choose authenticity over image, you disrupt a system that feeds on your insecurity. You stop being a consumer of meaning and start becoming a creator of it. You stop looking for signs and start becoming one. Carl Jung believed that the ultimate goal of human development was not happiness, but wholeness. Happiness, he said, is often a byproduct, not a purpose. And when you chase it directly, you often end up more fragmented. But when you pursue wholeness, when you accept your light and your darkness, your contradictions and your complexities, you begin to experience a deeper kind of fulfillment. Not the fleeting kind that comes from pleasure, but the lasting kind that comes from alignment. This inner alignment transforms your outer world. You make different choices. You attract different people. You speak differently, move differently, even breathe differently. You're no longer chasing life, you're participating in it. You stop asking, "What should I do?" and start asking, "What wants to emerge through me?" That subtle shift from control to collaboration with your own soul changes everything. And here's the final insight that Jung gifted us: individuation is never just for you. The more you become yourself, the more you serve the world. not in some grandiose, messianic way, but in the quiet, powerful way that only authenticity can. Because when one person becomes whole, they naturally begin to heal others through presence, through truth, through love. So I'll leave you with one last question. What sacred part of yourself have you been waiting to remember? Maybe it's time. Maybe the crowd is loud, but the soul is louder. Maybe the world doesn't need more perfect people, it needs more whole people. People who faced their shadow, peeled off the mask, and stepped into the wild, beautiful mystery of who they truly are. That's the hidden psychology Jung unveiled and the path that deep thinkers walk. Not to escape the world, but to illuminate it, starting from within.